alternatives to Stripe. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of different options that you have for your payment processing outside of Stripe. There's been a little bit of buzz lately in the direct response world, specifically about Stripe coming down and banning some accounts for digital content merchants, coaches, and anything in the direct response niches. And I'm going to talk to you today about, what's going on with that, what's going on with Stripe's restricted business list, and also what are some options for you in order to ensure that your business is up and running with no downtime and that you have efficient and reliable processing. So my name is Maria Sparagas. I run a company named Direct Payment, and we help thousands of merchants navigate the complex world of payment processing, and we find you some reliable and stable payment processing. So in terms of what's going on, let me explain first where Stripe is coming from. And there hasn't been really an official announcement about, Stripe shutting things down or not accepting certain merchants, but they did recently have an update in their restricted merchants list. And a lot of different businesses, business owners and so forth kind of took that they're tightening the reins and they're shutting down more digital content merchants and so forth. So the news here is that there is no news. Digital content businesses, supplements, health, beauty, fitness stuff, coaching has always been on the Stripe restricted merchant list. The only reason it's been highlighted again is because they made an update to their restricted merchant list, and it kind of came up as news for a lot of people and a lot of business owners, and people are starting to talk about it. But this is not anything new. Stripe has always shied away from or disliked these types of businesses and these types of niches. They tolerate it and they accept merchants in those niches. But if you become problematic in the sense of get a few too many chargebacks, or you have very large tickets, or you have ups and downs in volume, very high, very low in other months, or your refund rate gets over 10%, you're likely having, some major issues with Stripe, and Stripe is likely not the best solution for you. So it is important to investigate alternatives. And if you still are processing with Stripe, now is the time to get yourself a backup. So get another solution that can perhaps just mitigate your risk in payment processing. So your payment processing is your most vital part of your business. If you have an online business, not being able to accept credit cards will literally cut you at the knees. So with a process as important as payment processing and accepting credit cards in your business, you should have a backup regardless of what Stripe's policies are. Stripe can change their mind about working with you, or they can have shutdowns and they can have different various issues with their platform. You should always have a backup to that to make sure that your business is up and running and you have no bottlenecks. Just like you would have a backup server, you have backup employees, and you have backup processes to a lot of things in your business, payment processing, and the ability to accept credit cards, there should be a backup there. Now, Stripe is really a very large company and kind of the go-to for most online businesses. A lot of businesses and business owners don't know that there's that many options outside of Stripe. For example, if you're using, specific shopping carts, they integrate so quickly and seamlessly into Stripe, it feels like that's your only option. But I'm here to tell you there are plenty of alternatives to Stripe that are just as easy and just as simple to set up. So I'm going to list those out to you a little bit later. First, I want to explain to you what is Stripe. Now, it's important for you to understand what Stripe is because the alternatives to Stripe can differ, and it's important for you to make an educated choice as to what the best solution for your business is. Now, Stripe is what we call a payment aggregator or a third-party processor. So what that means is they have their own account. So they open an account with a bank that allows them to process payment transactions. Now, what happens after that is they decide that they have, for example, $1 million or $2 million or whatever the amount is on that account, and they subdivide it for different merchants. So that's important because when Stripe shuts you down, what happens is they deem that you're putting in too much risk on their merchant account. So they need to shut you down to avoid having issues for all the merchants that are using that account. So your performance may not necessarily be above threshold or may not actually be problematic per se in the payment processing world, but for them, if a lot of merchants are causing problems, meaning they have a couple more chargebacks than they should, they have to look at their whole portfolio to decide, who are the outliers that are causing maybe more problems than they should. And they can shut you down without even, giving you much notice. Sometimes you get 24 hours or you get an immediate termination notice. A lot of these notices that Stripe sends are sent by bots. You don't really have anybody to speak with. You try to email them, you're just going to get canned responses. So, this is a tech company and customer service is not necessarily their forte. They focus on technical integrations and making sure they have products and services to serve their market, but they don't have the human touch. They don't actually ever speak with you. You're only communicating with them by email. And if you're lucky, it's a human that's responding, but most of the time it's a bot. So keep that in mind when you're working with Stripe, and it's important to understand their business model and what their capabilities are. Now, all to say here is that Stripe actually does have advantages. On a tech standpoint, they are excellent. They have, very good uptime. They have very easy tools to use. They have a lot of integrations. For example, if you're using Buy Now, Pay Later, Stripe Connect, or all these different types of services, it's all kind of in one platform, one integration. So it makes things very easy for merchants and for businesses. And also you can get onboarded and start processing credit card payments within minutes with Stripe. They don't actually verify anything about your business, which is a little problem that I'm going to talk about later. But all in all, the process is very quick, very easy. And also there's a ton of options in there all through one integration. So it does make for a very convenient solution for a lot of different businesses. Now, because they're so big and so many different types of businesses want to work with them, they are quite strict and they have something called a restricted list. Now, if you read Stripe's restricted list, you'll notice that most online businesses would fall in a category that would be qualified as restricted. And that's done a little bit on purpose in the sense of if Stripe wants to shut you down, all they have to do is point to their terms and conditions and say, we've advised you that you're on the restricted list. So we review these accounts regularly and we shut them down when they come, when they are not performing the way we want them to perform. So that's kind of done intentionally because they want to give themselves an out if they don't want to work with you. And, again, like I said, read the Stripe restricted list. I'll put a link to that down below and you'll see that your business might, if you're selling anything online, most of the time it would fit in one category. As I mentioned earlier, I want to talk to you about a couple of alternatives to Stripe. So if you're working with Stripe right now and things are going well, keep working with Stripe, work on getting yourself a backup. If you've gotten a warning from Stripe, for example, if they're holding some reserves or they're asking questions about your business, anything along those lines, if they've been communicating with you, you need to move very quickly and get yourself a backup, because most of the time when Stripe starts asking questions or starts holding your money in reserves and so forth, I will tell you it does not end well. They usually are reviewing it, and I would say 8 out of 10 times when you get a Stripe review, your account gets shut down within a couple of weeks. So again, now is the time to get yourself an alternative and a backup to Stripe if you're in that situation. And if in the worst case, you have been shut down by Stripe and you're watching this video, I'm going to link another video down below of what you should do in order to get started and get your business back up and running. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the alternatives to Stripe. Now, because I explained to you what Stripe is, which is a third-party processor, you might recognize some other players in the market that are also third-party processors. One of them would be, for example, PayPal. Checkout.com is another third-party processor. Adyen is another third-party processor. Braintree is another third-party processor, which is kind of a subset of PayPal. But these are basically companies that own the account and then give you a subset in their account. How would you know that a company or a payment processor is what we call a third-party processor or an aggregator? Number one, your acceptance or your approval to process payments is usually instantaneous. They actually have no checks and balances. You just go on their website, just like Stripe, you put in your business information and you're ready to go with their API or their integration details. So that's one sign that that is a payment aggregator or a third-party processor. Another thing is once you do a test transaction, so when you take out your credit card just to see if, everything's working with your integration with Stripe or whoever you're working with in the third party space, you would see that on the descriptor, what shows up on the credit card statement will usually be a partial descriptor. What a partial descriptor is it'll say, for example, Stripe dash something. It'll have a connotation like PayPal, or, if you're working with Shopify payments, it'll say SP and then star. If there's a small part of the descriptor that's not part of your business, that's another sign that this is a third-party payment processor. And usually it's because they own the master merchant account, so they have their own descriptor and then they subdivide it. So they need to have a part of that descriptor in order to satisfy some requirements from their sponsor bank. So that's how you would know it's a third-party payment processor. And why I'm telling you this and why it's important is because working with a third-party payment processor or working with multiple third-party payment processors, like for example, if you're working with Stripe and your backup is PayPal, that's not the greatest idea. The reason is they don't do any checks and balances on your business. So they don't know actually what you're selling. They don't even know if what you're doing is legal. They don't verify if you are abiding by their terms and conditions. They're just taking it for an assumption that you've read the terms and conditions, you've read, what they accept, what they don't. And then what they do is they let you process credit card transactions. And if they see that you have too many refunds or your tickets are very high or you're up and down in volume, and that's when they'll come to you and say, hey, you know what? You are actually not allowed to process payments on our platform as per our restricted list. And you're going to say, well, I've been doing this for a year or 2 years. It's never been a problem. And they don't care because they tell you once you check that box, you've read the couple of pages of terms and conditions, the restricted lists and all that, and you should be aware of that. So if you're working with Stripe as your primary processor, your best bet is not to get a backup that is another third-party processor. Your best bet is really to get a backup that is a merchant account that you control, that has underwriting behind it and so forth. Let me explain a little bit more what that means. So a merchant account is actually an account in your business's name that is issued directly to you, and the bank is actually reviewing what they call, the process is called underwriting, everything about your business, everything about your website before they approve you to start processing credit card transactions. So I get a lot of merchants who are working with Stripe that come to us at Direct PayNet and they're like, hey, there's an application I have to fill out. I have to send documents and all that. I never had to do that with Stripe. And you're right. It is faster to get approved with Stripe. It's actually seamless. But, every time something happens very easily, there's usually a trade-off. And the trade-off is they're not checking anything. So if there's a problem, you're going to get shut down very quickly. Whereas if you get your own merchant account, the bank is verifying everything about your business, making sure that it makes sense. They'll verify your business niche, make sure that they, support that type of business model. For example, if you're a coach or if you're digital content, health, supplements, all that kind of stuff, there's different processors that work with these different niches and they're okay with working with you. They'll be aware of what you're selling, your business model and so forth. So once they approve you, the process could take 1 or 2 weeks. But once you're approved, there's no surprises. They know what you're selling. They approve you. They know, your business structure and so on and so forth. So once you have your merchant account ready and approved, you start processing and you're good to go. Now, as I said earlier, if you're working with Stripe now and things are working well, keep going, start the process to get your alternative to Stripe now, so you're not taken by surprise if something happens. But the key here, and this is an error that a lot of business owners make, is they set up a backup and they never use it. So in order to make it a viable backup, it is important to send some transactions there so the bank can get used to your sales volume, what type of transactions you have. You can make sure, for example, everything's working, that you're getting your payments, that reporting is what you're expecting it to be and so forth. So, depending on what your volume is, 10 to 20% of your transactions should always go to your backup. Ideally, 25% should go to your backup. And, then you can have the lion's share go, for example, to Stripe or to your main processor. But keeping a backup account dormant is almost as bad as not having a backup, right? Because if you've never used it, as I said, there could be some issues with integration or payments not going through or you not getting the settlements, and you won't know until you use it. And there's some payment processors that have guidelines against dormant accounts. So for example, some banks say if you haven't used the account in 3 months or 6 months, they'll shut it down. You may not even get a notice. It's just they're just going to shut it down and you won't know, obviously, because you're not processing. And then when, for example, something happens with Stripe and you want to move your stuff over, it's like, oh, well, you're shut down. You've never used the account. So when you've been shut down because your account's been dormant, what happens is when you want to use it, the only thing you can do is you'll have to go through the process once again, start an application, send in all the documentation and get approved for your business, which again takes 1 or 2 weeks. And at that point, if you've been shut down by Stripe, you don't want to wait 2 weeks to, put your business on hold and start processing. So it is important to use your backups, to have backups in place and test them and so forth. And it is important to have a couple of alternatives to Stripe. Depending on your business type and so forth, you may want to have 1 backup or 2 backups. I've seen some business owners have 3 backups. Obviously, the more volume you do, the more redundancy that you need. Don't get caught up and start opening up, tons of merchant accounts willy-nilly just to anybody who's willing to accept you and so forth, because it is important also to have, a decent amount of volume at each of these payment processors, depending on what your total volume is. You don't want to have 10 payment processors with a couple of $1,000s each. First of all, if you get a couple of chargebacks, they'll shut you down really quickly because they don't want to take too much risk for clients who are not generating a lot of money for them. And then secondly, it causes you a headache in terms of, accounting, being able to negotiate your fees, perhaps some tech issues and so forth. So really have a look of what your transaction volume is, how many chargebacks, refunds, and so forth you get so you can assess your risk, and then start with 1 backup. And then obviously add more as your business grows, so on and so forth. Now, one small thing I'd like to mention as I'm closing is the integration to your own merchant account should be fairly simple. If you're using a popular shopping cart, for example, Shopify or Go High Level or ClickFunnels or, Sticky.io or any of, the different shopping carts that are out there, I can pretty much guarantee that they are integrated to either Authorize.net or NMI. These are 2 popular gateways specifically in the US, and probably 99% of payment processors, including my company Direct Paynet, are integrated into these different gateways. So Authorize.net and NMI are simply softwares. We call them payment gateways. And all they do is they help you facilitate the connection between your shopping cart and your merchant account. So, I get a lot of inquiries for this, and merchants always ask me, hey, how are you different than Authorize.net? We are not different than Authorize.net. And most merchant account providers will give you options such as Authorize.net or NMI or different gateways. I mean, most merchant processors are gateway agnostic. Like, we'll be able to plug into pretty much any gateway. You just let us know which one you need for whatever reason. And typically, our tech team is able to figure it out, just like most other tech teams of different payment processors. So keep in mind to understand what a payment gateway is and look at your shopping cart and see which payment gateways are integrated into that shopping cart. And then it's very simple. If it's NMI or Authorize.net, you have the pick of the litter in the US for pretty much any payment processor. If you're in Europe or outside, you still have to look at which payment gateways your shopping cart supports, and then you can go from there to look for a provider. So the tech stuff is fairly easy. The important thing is really to find a partner that you're willing to work with, that can give you personalized service, that is able to answer your questions and perhaps, be a little bit different than the service that you're getting from Stripe. And keep in mind, as I said, Stripe is a great solution for some businesses. And even for your business, if you're working well with them, it's a good option to have on. But don't forget your backup and get yourself some alternatives to Stripe to make sure that your business is up and running without headaches. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, or if you're a content creator or, digital product business or health and beauty, feel free to reach out to me, ask me any questions. I'm always happy to answer any questions about Stripe and merchant accounts and so forth. And have yourself a great day.